And I'm going to hand things over to Lisa. And Lisa and I are going to be working together to kind of bounce some stuff off. I'll be doing some stuff with the breakout rooms and the slideshow. So be patient as we go back and forth today. And then there's a video that we'll be showing. So when the video is showing or the slideshows are up, at that point, feel free to turn off your cameras just to help with streaming. So with that being said, Lisa, I'll hand it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Yay. I will just kind of jump right into it. I'm feeling excited, my cat just spilled my cup of water over like immediately at 10:30. He just bam. So that's a good omen, I think, actually. So Darlene, could you pull up the land acknowledgement slide and we can start there? I decided to write my own land acknowledgement. It's been something that I've been wanting to do. And so I gave it a whirl and very open to feedback. I would like to acknowledge the land that my feet have touched the most, belonging to, since time immemorial, the Skokomish and Twana people, the Squamish and Stillaguamish and Coast Salish people, as well as the Yakima people. It is their sacred land I was raised on and continue to reside. I acknowledge and mourn the wisdom, life, and spirits that have been ripped apart by genocide, forced land removal, mass rape, and serious disease. I acknowledge and celebrate the ways Indigenous peoples' culture still thrives richly in our local Indigenous communities and hold myself accountable to growing, learning, and respecting the ancient culture. If anyone wants to add their own in the chat or not, I'm guessing we're all local, Seattle-ish. Cool. Awesome. Also, this art, I just wanted to make sure I share that this art is from an Indigenous community member in my local community, and he's done murals in my son's school and throughout the community, and his house is covered in his murals. So his name is Andrew Morrison, and I can share his website information, but his art is throughout the presentation as just something special and pretty. Awesome. And then I will introduce myself a bit. I am Lisa. I live in Washington. I live in Mountlake Terrace, and I live with my two kiddos, and we have a pretty strong community group that we live in, celebrate, play in. I love to be outside. I like to be on the move. I learned how to ride a one wheel this year. Have you guys seen this? I learned how to ride that, and so I'm like, I feel very cool when I do that. And it just feels so nice, very floaty. They call it the float life. I identify as Chicane, and we'll kind of go into that later. As an activist, I consider myself a reflective practitioner, kind of all over in early childhood education, but also like within my community. And you know, I love thinking and sharing ideas and reflecting, and that's part of who I am. I feel confident to say that I love to build community, and it's something that is very important to me. I am queer in all the ways, genderqueer. I identify as non-binary, use they, them pronouns, and I'm also a parent, which I love and is also a large part of my identity. In the past few years, I mentioned I've been working in my community, doing activism around that, kind of, again, just building community around social justice and mostly racial justice. And then I was working with childcare resources for a while, and I recently transitioned back into the classroom. So I'm now working back in the classroom as a pre-K teacher, and I'm so very happy. And it's just, I forgot how much joy is in the classroom when when everything goes right. So yeah, I also started a grad program last year, called Critical Educational Change in Leadership, which is also around undoing our systems, basically our white supremacy systems in our school and education fields. And I did one quarter and then I had to drop out. So to be continued. Next slide. I think. Okay, so before we tap into the video, I just want to kind of share what I think this presentation is about and kind of what I would love to get out of it. When I was working in a coaching position, I was working with childcare home practitioners. So people who had their childcare in their homes. They were all women of color. They were in a zip code that was that had been analyzed for its poverty and kind of at-risk communities. So it was intentionally like a lower income community that we were working with, coaching both the provider, but then also being an advocate to the family. And it was there in that position that I really started thinking about the power dynamics that are at play when myself as a white presenting person coming into these homes of women of color, most typically Black women of color, and coming in and trying to like basically change their entire system and how they've been doing childcare, and saying that that it's better, it's best practice and all of that. And that just really got me in this reflective place of like, what actually is empowering to these providers and also to the families, two different questions. And how do we, as a company or an organization, a lot of our organizations are standing really strong in this anti-bias, anti-racist, we're going to undo the system and do our part. But a lot of that is like, it's such a big change. And so when we say we want to do that, but yet we're still coming into these homes saying, hey, do everything our way, and kind of still meeting these, still practicing these kind of white supremacy culture practices of how we're interacting and our expectations of them. And how do we do it differently is kind of the question that I have, of how do we create strong relationships that are effective and produce growth while protecting, or maybe not protecting our bottom line, basically, and those deliverables and all of that. And I think that what I've heard from other people is that is a common thing of like, how do we build relationships when we have all these deliverables and we have to do this data and we have to do the documentation, and how that can really get into the way of building real, genuine relationships that are more than a relationship just to get your final product out of, I guess. So yeah, my hope is that I can hear from you all and kind of your experiences, and if you all are coaches, or if you're on a teacher side, or kind of where you fall in that. I would love to hear everyone, as you feel comfortable to share some of that and our pauses and discussion points of the presentation. I hope that it's slightly fun, that we can have good humor about it. I'll definitely crack a couple jokes. I hope that's okay. So the video I picked isn't like super direct to this conversation, but it's a really good overview of kind of like the big picture, how identities and social structures are created and how they're in comparison to white culture and the norm of whiteness, and the supremacy of whiteness. And then also it kind of touches on just the inherent value that oppressed communities actually have and how we can kind of make space for that. So it's 7 minutes, and I hope that it is clear. It's pretty.
Think of a baby when it's born as a simple
I'm going to put the video on now. Can you just tell me if you, what, are you seeing the PowerPoint screen or are you seeing the video screen?
We see the video. I see the
Okay.
video.
Okay, great.
Stick figure. Pretend identity is like the first set of clothes given to them by others who expect them to wear that style throughout their life. Now consider their personal style, might be color or hairstyle, as clothes that they would pick to best match their personality. Likewise, gender identity is shaped at birth when a doctor assigns gender. Grandparents then begin to describe boys as having strong cries or gift girls pink headbands with bows. For some, gender assignment and all that is associated with it is without conflict. As we mature, we carry this assigned identity as we engage with social structures like schools. Cisgender kids go into their assigned boys or girls bathroom without hesitation. Walking into a different bathroom is met with redirection. For transgendered and genderqueer people, however, the assignment of gender at birth is painful. Their identities create tensions and are in opposition to assigned gender roles, behaviors, and expectations from friends, family, and society. They worry, which bathroom is safe for me? This tension also happens around language. In the U.S., English is considered a primary or sole language, and this affects everyone's identity. Unless you're in a foreign language class or a bilingual school, there can be stigma about speaking languages other than English in the classroom or in the playground. You may receive messages that English is the only acceptable language in school. The social messaging is that speaking another language is shameful and problematic, while speaking English, ideally without an accent, is rewarded as good behavior. In this way, Spanish-speaking family members are stigmatized as others, and speaking Spanish becomes undesirable. This process explains why, regardless of country of origin, children of non-English speakers lose their language by the third generation. These are just a couple examples that demonstrate how social structures construct, limit, and place value on identities. This becomes highly problematic when school completion, racial profiling, poverty, and health disparities are associated with specific identities. Social messages from schools, peers, and the media are conflicting. They tell us that all men are created equal despite what is actually reinforced by everyday interactions, like the classic example of a white woman who guards her purse in the elevator when a black man enters. A clash begins when the social messaging and the actual experiences do not match. We cannot be equal if we define one group as better or even superior to another based on gender or racial identification. Whiteness is the preferred norm, the identity that all other identities are compared to or contrasted against. The norm of whiteness is so strong that it is invisible. For instance, when describing a person, if their race is not described, the assumption is that they are white. Inequality touches all parts of our lives. Even when we're thinking of starting a healthy family, we assume that education, income, and healthy lifestyles should produce the same healthy birth outcomes regardless of race in the U.S. Yet research indicates that regardless of age, education, income, and healthy behaviors, and unrelated to genetics, Black women in the U.S. have poorer birth outcomes than their white counterparts. Black women experience increased infant deaths, maternal deaths, and low birth weights. Many scientists associate the resulting poorer birth outcomes to increased stress related to experiences of racism. But how do we have social change and equity when those who are most affected can be demoralized and frustrated by their everyday attempts to achieve the same outcomes as their white counterparts? Our relationship to identity groups can be the key to creating change. Since social inequities occur predominantly to communities of color, social transformation requires, among other things, a mobilization of identity. Social movements based in identity, such as the Black Liberation Movement, the Chicano Movement, and the Women's Rights Movement, harness identity by educating people about social structural inequality and its impact on them. In this way, social movements can create an educated counter-narrative. Stories like that of Benjamin Banneker, a black architect who was hired by Thomas Jefferson to build the White House after the French architect Pierre Charles L'Enfant stormed off the job. This exemplifies Banneker's invisibility in U.S. history and the prominence of L'Enfant, who has a metro stop named after him in Washington, D.C. Knowing the invisible history and cultural icons of communities can be used to coalesce people of a shared identity and can call forth other successful historical struggles. For instance, the United Farm Workers Union and their leaders Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta carried banners of Our Lady of Guadalupe as they marched from Delano to Sacramento, California to demand justice for farm workers. The same icon was used by Father Miguel Hidalgo in Mexico's fight for independence from Spain, and again in the Mexican Revolution by Emiliano Zapata. The way that these icons were used are also evidence that global and national struggles for transformational change can be organized at local levels. As people committed to social change, the questions for us are, how much do we really understand about the history and legacies of the communities in which we work? And, as both insiders and outsiders of these communities, how do we use the power of narrative informed by cultural histories of contribution, resistance, and justice to activate change in grassroots community organizing?
We don't
he
hear
might be
anything.
me. Oh, now we can hear you.
No, that's me saying, I think, yeah.
Oh yeah, Lisa, you're on mute.
Oh, I thought you guys just all really wanted to participate. I was asking what y'all thought and if there was anything that stood out to you before I share my thoughts. Does anyone want to share anything? The reason I chose this, hold on. The reason I like this video is I just thought that it, gave a good flow of those social structures, and like I said, how it really creates this otherness against whiteness, and that's kind of what I wanted to pull into our discussion, is not just whiteness, but then also like, I think everything is rooted in that, but just differences, of one thought and value over another, and having this idea that we are ranked in some way by value or skill or strength or anything like that. I think that was like the most powerful thing that came out to me and that I want to take into the conversation. And then the other part at the end, when they were kind of talking about how these grassroots organizations, like these communities already have inherent strengths and values and skills that may not be valued in white supremacy culture, but they obviously have the ability to organize and empower and lift themselves up. When we think about that in our work, kind of like zooming out or shifting over or whatever, and kind of comparing that to our work, like how can we empower the people we're coaching or mentoring? How can we empower them to find those like inherent skills and values and build that up, whether or not they fit with white supremacy culture or this idea of what a good partner is, or mentoree is, or a good teacher is, or whatever like that. But really finding what is that special unique gift that our the people we're working with have, and how can we expand on that and build that, and maybe build a narrative around that brings empowerment. Thoughts before we move on?
Please feel free to unmute yourself if you have something to say, or put it in the chat room and I could share it for you.
I have a couple of things to comment on. The facts or the factoid about third generation immigrant families losing their language abilities. I think it's going back to understanding being multilingual, and the richness of heritage is a powerful addition to your makeup. Because I think as the US demographics become more diverse, people are realizing there is a richness in having access to multiple viewpoints in terms of family dynamics, work ethic, or whatever. And so I think there's more acceptance of being multilingual and having a background that's maybe biracial or triracial, or however many races or ethnic backgrounds you want to accept. And I think it adds to a better viewpoint of understanding how people see different things. If they're presented with the same situation, they might see it differently depending on their understanding of cultural backgrounds. Like, the child is not meeting your eye or he's saying silent. It's not being disrespectful. It's the way they were taught on how to respond to somebody in that power dynamic. So I think being more aware of cultural backgrounds and maybe family preferences is helpful in making sure there's no misunderstandings and understanding connection to a child.
Yeah, there's lots of information we can get from being curious and open to learning more about that background. There's so much to gain there. Yes, go. Yes.
Hi, I'm Daniel Garcia from, I work with toddlers on the Stanford campus. I've been there since 1970. So my concern is that there is this invisible white English culture that we're all grown up in. And I echo the concern of the person prior that one's mother language tends to dissipate over time. And I'm wondering if there are strategies to preserve one's language. If I had at one time a family who were Estonian. So they took their child to Estonian dance classes and had regular events like every week where they would go and meet with other people to keep the culture and the language alive. But that was kind of an exception. I think most of us just succumb to the culture and the environment that's around us, so that when I play music and sing a Hebrew song, kids laugh sort of uncomfortably. They're not sure what to make of it. It seems unusual, odd, foreign, until one of my Hebrew children joins in with me. And then suddenly it becomes valid and fun and accepted. So having that one child, one or two children who appreciate the song, who know the song, is familiar with them, they sing along with me, and suddenly it becomes not so foreign, but valid. So I guess I'm wondering, are there strategies to maintain one's language and one's culture that people have employed? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. The language aspect of that video is super important, and it's like my exact story. I'm third generation Mexican American, and my language is lost for sure. It was lost because it was shamed out of my dad when he went to school. So yeah, yep. And it is a tragedy, and it is their culture. It is our culture. It is our connection to culture, languages. And I think that's also, it's just this link to culture. And your story about singing the song and then having those kids join in is just like very I don't know, light bulby for me. And it's a place that we can empower our kids and give them that exposure to this other language and have it validated as something to celebrate, a new language to celebrate. Just the other day at the preschool I'm at, which are mostly, we actually have a rich, diverse language, but we all are speaking English, and language hasn't become part of our program. But anyway, I sang a song in Spanish, and one of the kids was like, kind of taken aback and uncomfortable, like just like you said. And that was really surprising to me, but also made me excited of like, this is a job that I have now, is to bring this language in and celebrate it, so that the kids who do speak Spanish there, then hopefully they can, see that it's valued. Do you have more to add?
I have just one remark about the uniqueness of my team, my teaching team. When a child has a birthday, we sing happy birthday to them. I have a teacher who is Spanish, I have a teacher who is Portuguese, one who is from India, and another who is Russian. So they hear the happy birthday song in 4 different dialects. So again, I think that birthdays happen frequently. They experience this often. And after a while, they know that Svetlana is going to deliver the song in Russian. Okay, so again, I think it's part of the fabric, and as a consequence, there is not a kind of a foreignness to language.
Right. Yeah. And the kids have strong relationships with you all. So when you all share that, and that part of you, it becomes like a magic thing, and brings that relationship is what makes it meaningful. And I think that's something that we can take into our coaching and mentoring as well, like building the relationships of the things that are happening, and the learning that's happening between each other is meaningful, and can help us kind of grow our capacity and our perspective, and get to know each other a little bit more. Do we have anything else? Maybe we can, how do you all feel about the concept of power and privilege? Do you feel fairly comfortable with those concepts?
What do you mean by comfortable?
Comfortably uncomfortable.
Power and privilege, not so comfortable.
yeah I guess maybe understanding the context that we're kind of sharing in it and talking about it in, the power and privilege that we come into with each relationship, and especially in this mentoring position or coaching position, being able to recognize that is playing a key role in how we're interacting with our people. It's not comfortable, and that is definitely like, a huge part of it is getting past this discomfort. So I think I'm gonna skip the next slide, but we should look at it because the art is really beautiful on it. Andrew Morrison, so beautiful. Oh, those kids, joy, absolute joy. This, I will read this really quick actually, because it says power in this context refers to the capacity to exercise control over others, deciding what is best for them, deciding who will have access to or denial from resources. I didn't feel 100% about this definition, but what I really did like about it was the idea that it brings up this idea of gatekeeping, which I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with, but in that coaching role and in that mentoring role, we are like the ultimate gatekeeper, right? We have like so much power to decide how to get to our partner that we're working with, and we have so much power in most likely we'll have so many resources, and those resources give us power. So I just thought was important to kind of highlight, as a part of the power that we have is the decision of opening or closing access to folks. And then privilege refers to the right or exemption from liability or duty granted as a special benefit or advantage. So just unearned privilege, the privilege you get for just looking a certain way or talking a certain way or acting a certain way or
being a certain height.
Being a certain height. Yeah. Yep. Abilities. There's a lot of different areas that this can come into that we often don't think about. I really like that video that it talked about gender kind of as our starting point, just because it's not always where we start. I think we typically start with race as kind of exploring power and privilege, but there's also so many other areas that it covers as well. And ability is one that I have really been reflecting on for myself, of just it's something that I didn't even think of for so long because I am able-bodied and running into folks who have a different experience and a different kind of ability, it really kind of checked that for me. So
I'm
if we go-
wondering, Lisa, a little bit about, folks who are sitting on this call that sit in a role of coach or mentor, or someone who's supporting educator in their work. How do they reflect or see the power privilege that they have in their position? Maybe not necessarily their ability or race or identity, but in just the title or responsibility, because sometimes that plays into it too. You can shift a dialogue that you're having with someone who you're coaching or mentoring just based on your position. And I'm curious if anyone has any reflection on that.
I can add something. I'm Pamela. I work at the Hearing, Speech, and Deaf Center. I'm the director of the preschool. We're an American Sign Language and English bilingual program for kids 0 to 5. And I am a white hearing person, and I'm the director of a program for deaf and hard of hearing children. And Lisa, you mentioned about disability. It's like, we can have that whole beautiful mural of all those things, and where's disability? It's just not even addressed. It's not even like, so my position every single day is, I'm in this role because of something you just said about having access to resources. Power is about having access to resources, and I have access to a lot of resources, and been trying to grow my program and hire a lot of deaf staff. And I'm never going to be someone whose native language was American Sign Language. I'm never going to be, but I still have access to privilege. And so I can do the work that I do. And it's yucky every day because I see myself in that sort of gatekeeper kind of role. And I could walk away. I could not do it, but I don't think that that's helpful to the community that I serve. So it's really very challenging. And, what you said about language is very interesting because it's very different in the deaf community. Most parents who have a deaf baby, the deaf baby is the first deaf person they met. Like 90% of deaf kids are born to hearing families. And so where are they getting their language from? Their language is not coming from their parents. Their parents have to decide to give them access to sign language. And very often they don't, because I want you to have my language. I want you to have my English. I want you to have my talking and my listening. So it's very layered. Anyway, I wanted to throw that in there too.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for the question, Darlene. I think that is that is just another area that we have to assess and check ourselves in. If you could go to, I don't know what slide number it is. I believe it is 7, maybe, Trey? Yeah, so this is these were just common power imbalances that I talked about, or just put on there to kind of start conversation, but Darlene kind of started that for us, and in that maybe under our perceived or real authority category, is you come in and you have a certain title, and you come in and the person you're working with knows that title and understands that title in a way that may make them feel that they have less power, no matter what kind of disposition you come in with, or what your goals are. You already have this this position and kind of set up around who you are coming into this role. Because, you know, even the word coach or mentor, I think already gives you that status, right? And then, so how does that affect the person that you're working with? Does anyone have any kind of just more firsthand things like Pamela shared about how it kind of shows up in your work, or where you can see yourself experiencing those? Daniel?
Yes, thank you, Pamela, for your remarks. We just introduced into our classroom a deaf child. We once upon a time, some ages back, had a blind child in our program, but this is the first deaf child. And I think what stands out for me is the father. He is so enthusiastic. I don't know if he was that way before the child arrived, but he said, we are going to teach her. We teach her sign. We talk to her constantly. Their effort is like all out. And he is so positive. He's amongst the most positive people I've ever met. He's just, this girl is going to have a normal life. And this girl is going to have speaking of resources, all the resources that we can muster for her. So she's still getting to, be at ease in the program. She understands sort of our routines and ceremonies. But the real excitement, honestly, on my team is the dad. He brings so much enthusiasm and optimism. So I'm wondering, I imagine it's the case, but it feels that the parent's role is really critical in this instance, and probably all when there's a disability. That's all.
When you're working with that dad, and like, I'm curious how you all are sharing information, and how are those dynamics? Like, do you all work closely with the dad and finding those resources, or how do you all, is the dad kind of bringing it in for you all? I'm just curious.
I think more than anything else, it's just his attitude and his energy. When, for example, he's just introduced her to our classroom, and in the first couple of days, she napped. When she woke up, he called and he said, I want to be with her right away when she wakes up. I'm at home. I'm not doing anything. I'm coming to pick her up. And I just like this idea that if I had a choice, I would be with my child, be with her. And that, I don't know, that's a little bit rare. I mean, parents have their duties and their obligations, and they that need to be fulfilled. But in this case, he said, is she awake? I'll be right there. So again, that's probably with the recognition that I'm her chief support. I'm her real resource. You guys will get to know her and learn about her, and I'm sure you'll do a great job, but I'm the one who can do the critical work right now. So again, I like his eagerness more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to push back a little.
Great.
So you're in a power position, definitely, with the children and the family. How does the child have access to language in the classroom?
Access to language.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned before, I have a very diverse staff.
Mm-hmm.
So she will hear Spanish, Portuguese.
But you said she's deaf. So
she does have implants.
Right. But that doesn't mean she's not deaf.
No, of course. But
so she still doesn't have. And so maybe she has unimpeded visual access as a sighted person.
Mm-hmm.
But as a deaf person already in your class, she doesn't have access to all the things that everyone else has access to. Is there anyone signing in the classroom with her?
No, the signing is with dad. Maybe
Right.
a few staff, few teachers, no sign.
So she doesn't have access to her peers, and she doesn't have access to language models.
Well, she's hearing language. She's hearing music. She's hearing us.
it, how can you know that? And,
I
you
see,
know,
I see
it's
her
just-
dance in response to the music.
And understanding the experience of a deaf person with music and sound, it's not like you're either deaf, you got nothing, or you're hearing and you got everything, you know,
Mhm.
there's a range.
Sure.
And where's the child gonna see deaf adults, and where's the child gonna be exposed to deaf culture? And, you know, I bet from the way you're talking about that dad, that he is taking his kid out to meet deaf people and be involved in deaf culture. But it's hard, you know, deafness is such a small incidence that there, you know, there's not 20 deaf kids in your class.
Mhm.
You know, and you say, oh, the dad's going to give her a normal experience, you know, she's going to be normal. Like,
He wants to. I didn't say he's going to.
but what's normal? You know, who gets to decide what's normal? You know, that's a real, that's really,
Maybe I flip that around. What he wants is a child with normal capabilities who the impairment,
no,
impairment
that's not better.
huh?
That's not better.
That's not better.
No, because just as we were saying that whiteness is the norm, right?
I
Ability
see.
is the norm. So it's like, well, we want to give them as close to a white experience as possible. You know, like you would never say that,
No,
but you would say,
you would say rich. We want to give her a rich experience.
right,
No?
and we want, and honestly, we have so much internalized ableism
Mhm.
where we're like, the experience of a deaf person in the world is inferior to the experience of a hearing person in the world. And like, that's in us as hearing people.
I don't know
Like,
that I
and it-
feel that.
And okay, well, you can sit with that. And it's interesting to think about how, you know, thinking about what a child might miss out on as being deaf, but it's also a whole other way of looking at the world. and
I never
experiencing the
imagined
world.
the idea of missing out. I feel
No.
like
No,
the-
I'm not trying to put words on you, and I'm just
Mhm.
trying to poke you a little.
no, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. But again, I feel like the environment, even though we are unconsciously promoting a white English privileged approach and values, the environment in the toddler classroom and yard is infinitely rich. It's totally, totally full to the brim and bursting with life. For a deaf person to come in, I expect that she will perceive, take, enjoy, imbibe, and absorb what is important for her, what is
So-
meaningful for her, what
And
is
still at the same
appealing
time
for her.
be missing something.
Hmm?
And at the same time, I think what Pamela's trying to say is that yes, all those experiences are there, but seeing and connecting with her peers or adults in her ability to connect is just different.
Mhm.
So in my program, I have deaf and hearing and hard of hearing children in a context where we are a bilingual program, and we're really working hard to figure out what that really means. And the teachers, most of my lead teachers are deaf, and they sign all the time. And the kids are able to sign with each other, and they're able to sign with the teachers. So like the child that you talked about that went on the weekends with their family to get the cultural experience of, where was it? Not Ecuador. What did you say?
Estonia.
Estonia. So the child who is getting this Estonian culture, you know, is
Sure.
like, that's what we want for kids, to have that rich place that they come from. But for deaf kids, it's different because they may not be getting it vertically from their parents. Their parents have to go out and pursue it in order to present it to children. And it's a big fight to get access to it. And, you know, we're so excited about what we're doing that we're making this sort of place where there are no barriers, right? But what happens when you have a Spanish speaking family that comes into my context and the teachers don't necessarily speak Spanish, they don't necessarily hear Spanish, but Spanish and the home culture is so hugely important to the child. So how do we bring that in? And we've been working with the Soy Bilingue people and coaches trying to learn, you know, how, if they're not hearing Spanish, but Spanish culture is a really important thing for this child to hold in themselves. How do we do that? How do we make that happen? You know, do we put like, you know, put Spanish words on the wall? Like, you know, it's really complicated, you know, and I love that you said how they sang happy birthday in all the different languages. That's, you know, that's a great way to ritualize the inclusion of everything, right? But if we sang that in 7 different languages in my classroom, it'll miss the mark, you know? So it's, you know, it's just complicated. And this whole concept of power and, you know, what is the default, you know, is something I'm really struggling with. It's very hard. And every single new parent that comes into our program, most parents come in with I want my kid to be normal. I want my kid to have a normal life.
Yeah.
Like, well, of course, every parent wants their child to have a wonderful, rich and valuable and, you know, everything. And at the same time, the parent.
Oop, you got on mute somehow, Pamela.
Oh, the parents, where did I stop? The parents come in with an inherent bias. Anyway, so I will let us move on because I, you know, want to derail.
I think, yeah.
Or take over.
This is what I want, is to create a space where we can have these conversations, because I don't know about you all, but I always feel like there is a lack of space, and I do want to create that. And how I will pull it back a little bit is just, you know, we can kind of check all these boxes, and we can work with what we have and use these cultures and these language that we have access to. But then when we have a kid that comes in with something that we don't have access to at the time, how do we, like you said, bring that in and use that family as a resource to know that child, know what the experience, a rich experience is for that child. How do we use that relationship with the family to bring it in? And that you're definitely going to have to check your power right there. And you're definitely going to have to check your narrative of, are you using an assumption like, oh, we want this child to experience sound in the most normal way as possible? Or, you know, do we want to cater her experience to what is actually meaningful to her? And I think that's the ultimate goal, right? is to move away from what we think is the goal to what is actually the goal. Where are the actual strengths, and how do we promote that? Like, that is what we're gonna fluff up, you know, and build. So I really appreciate the conversation around ability, because like you said, it is so invisible, but yet as soon as you start seeing it, you're like, holy shit, it's everywhere. I mean, it's like everywhere. How you get out of your car, how you walk up to your office door, how you unlock your door, how you staple your papers. Someone I worked with, she didn't like staples because she didn't have the dexterity to take the staples out and when she needed to separate the pages, and so she asked for it to be a paper clip. I think that's just, it's such a small thing, but it was so huge for that person. In my own life, I have been like really learning and accepting and all of that around the way my head works. I have ADHD. My head is a buzzy brain, as I call it, and it doesn't work on a linear line. And so I've had to learn to accept that the way that my brain works as valid, because I was always comparing it to a normal brain, which I'm just not. Like, I'm not, but the brain that I do have is actually kind of cool, and it can do some really cool things that this brain can't do. So it's just kind of back to that, like, moving away from the stories that white dominant culture has given us, and empower the other beautifulness that we have that has been snuffed out, essentially. So I don't know if you guys want to touch on some of these other ones. Gender and age, that's one that I know I have experienced in my both age. I've typically always been one of the younger ones in the group. I just changed to this new school where I'm one of the older ones, and it's like amazing, and it's a different experience. And who knew, you know? When I was coaching other providers who are older than me, what were the assumptions being made there about me, or even the assumptions I made about myself and the ways that I felt about myself and my confidence. So kind of assessing those. So yes, Daniel.
Just one thing that you said, Lisa, about seeing yourself as separate and distinct from the norm. My feeling these days with the children in my classroom is they're coming in, we've sent some graduates on, and now I'm getting new children in this month. And what I feel is that really, really good teaching is about knowing your child so well, knowing their preferences, knowing their personality, whether they got enough sleep. It's just all of these things add up to being able to provide something for that child that's a custom fit. I think that more and more, I feel like good education is having someone who can provide a tailor-made kind of situation for you that takes into account your uniqueness and celebrates that. So again, I feel like this disparity between the norm that we're all promoting and who we actually are, I'm feeling like teachers need to know who the child actually is. And then that's kind of the point for leverage and association and relationship. Thank you.
And I think it's really important, like the way we get that information again is through relationships with families of how do we custom fit our program to these kids. We get that information from families, but in order to get that information, we need a relationship. And then in order to have a relationship, we need to check our power and where we are in that and how that's going to affect that conversation. Because I mean, that is the dream, right? To be able to create a environment that isn't about learning a certain letters or hitting certain milestones at a certain time, but really creating an environment that all kids can thrive. And that is a great privilege to be able to design a program like that, to have the resources. That's the school I'm in right now. I call it a bougie preschool because it has all those resources, and it's a game changer, right? It's like, I completely understand and I'm very grateful for the resources that we have, but it doesn't escape me that the early Head Start programs that I've been in are Head Start programs, and that's where this work needs to be done. That's where the tailoring needs to be done. Like, that's where all these resources need to go. And it just, like, you know, sometimes I almost have to laugh at it. Like, we're like, oh, come to us, children, and we're basically being paid by these families to cater to their children and to their anxieties about their children, you know, and it's sad. It is the world that we live in, but I don't know where I was going with that. Anyway, back to power imbalances and the building those relationships. I think the most important thing, and some of us are kind of sharing those stories, and maybe we can dig into it a little bit more. But before that, I just want to go to the next slide and kind of look at kind of some bigger systemic challenges that come into building these relationships and breaking down that power discrepancy. So we're talking a lot about white supremacy culture. That's ultimately the thing that holds power is what is defined as good and valuable and good, has all been determined by white supremacy. And so then there's the more, like, you know, data collection, documentation, the day-to-day logistics, the deliverables. And then I think about access on there as just like thinking about my own experience of working with those childcare, in-home childcare providers that like we're asking them to do all of this stuff, and then their actual access to resources, not just materials and stuff like that, but time, and time really is a huge one. Time, energy, to do the things that we want them to do. Like, where is that? What are we actually asking our people to do? Do any of those touch with any of you all?
Something that's resonating as you're talking is even the premise of this conversation. We're talking about resources and having coaching and consulting or mentoring available. And there are a lot of providers out there that don't even have that as a resource. And so curiosity is starting to peak in my mind on how providers like Hilltop or other programs who have those resources, the City of Seattle, Department of Education, Early Learning, like how do we support providers without coming in as our privilege or power is more, but as a resource to those who are limited, and how, you know, this whole concept that we're discussing today seems in itself a thing of power or a thing of privilege. And so I don't know, my head's spinning of like, yeah, how do we help those families in a family home childcare center who may not have access or time? You know, which of us out there are actually stepping up to say, we'll come cover your classroom or your program so that you do have the time to step away and do these things or help yourself to gain access to something like a Head Start program or ECAP or even a family home provider. Those limitations are there. So yeah, I'm just lots of things are floating through my mind right now.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Darlene, so many times that's exactly all I wanted to do for these providers is like, hey, why don't I watch the kids and you go work on the things that I need you to do? Like, and I would get in trouble for that. I would get in trouble if I did that. And that was a really frustrating thing for me because that is the way that I want to work with people. Like they're my people. And I understand that there's a blur of like a professional relationship and boundaries. And that's something that will forever be something that I'll juggle with. But it's like, that's how I would help anyone else, is to step in for them while they get a break, right? But our culture and the way work works is to not do that and to, you know, make our best guesses on how they can actually meet what we want when we actually don't really know, unless we do that work. And, you know, Head Start does do a lot of community-based feedback, and they have, you know, parent committees and all of that, and that's amazing. But at the end of the day, it is still a bottom line. It is still a government funded program. It is still data collecting and deliverables. So it is, I want to bring food. I want to sit down. I want to talk about the curriculum. I just want to hang out. Like, let's go, you know, barbecue on the porch, please. Like, that's what I want to do. But there's this just brick wall between that, and who knows if that is even effective or not. But it's just like I want something outside of, hello, I am here to do these things with you, let's, you know, robot mechanicalized kind of thing.
So Maria asked the question, is there something that can be provided as a grant for professional development for those home care providers as a part of their coverage and licensing requirement? And Lisa, I'll let you respond to this, but from what I know, that there is actually a lot more resources being established for family home providers. Some family home providers are now a part of Early Achievers. Some are a part of the Seattle Preschool Program. There is a whole network of family support services for home providers that help them in regards to those things that you're asking about. But I don't know if you wanted to add something to that, Lisa.
Yeah. Basically that what you said, that they're building those resources, and, you know, but again, it comes down to time. Like that's always for any of us, really. Like, it's like, yes, there are all these resources, and you know, they're better than nothing, I would think. And I know there's like in-home providers can call substitutes from the Imagine Institute, and they can get subs from the pool, and they can even get like long-term subs. So there are some things like that, but they're not always used, they're not always known about, and you're having essentially a stranger come into your home and take over these kids that you have solely been in charge of in your house. So there are some things there. I know that was one thing that I wish that we could have provided for our providers was a sub or an assistant teacher, because there was just no way for one person to do all the admin stuff and then but take care of kids all day long. And these are like, some of them are 24-hour operating programs.
I have a question. So I work for Hilltop, and one of the things they're starting to use right now is the use of work studies, students or internships. Is that something that maybe the state or local agencies could use as a way to create homegrown talent and maybe create a base that's within by Black and Indigenous and people of color, where it seems like there's a lot of women or families who use the local immigrant society because they're familiar with, they're teaching our culture to our kids, and we want to keep that. And maybe create a network of immigrant or social resources that take into account, this is home service providers for Somalis, here's for Korean speaking, and if you need help, we might maybe go to the local community college who have these ECE classes and say, hey, these are the surrounding home care providers that might need help. And so if we can create a pool of interested work study, or maybe even high school kids who might be interested in getting some kind of background in childcare and whatnot, create a network of people who might value this as a way to get work experience if they're going into education, or maybe just work experience, what's involved in holding a job, or being on time and things like that.
Yeah, I think that is something we need to tap into to build that kind of culturally relevant care, and then also just providers in general, because those are dropping like flies as well, right? So just, yeah, finding those connections. And you made a good point about immigrant communities and refugee communities. That's a large part that that the city of Seattle coaches that they do, and childcare resources as well, that there are a lot, especially in the in-home childcare field or whatever, there are tons of those communities. And that was like part of our idea about this early Head Start program going into these communities, is that these are hubs of culture and hubs of the culture, basically. Like these are hubs of community based in culture, and the families that are going there, it's usually like hearsay, or it's the neighbors, or or people that are part of their community already. And so it's a really valuable part that I think we haven't really understood quite how to best support, because the coaches that we do have, we're limited in language. There's some, sometimes there's some like intercultural things that come up, and just kind of how people treat each other even inside their own group. So there's definitely lots of brainstorming around how to kind of empower that and give and give them autonomy as well, to how can we build that community so that they can create their own coaching or mentoring system, or create their own education system, or educating their younger children to be caretakers, something like that. That's important. I worked with one family, not a family, a provider, and she was just, I couldn't believe how beautiful and how amazing her program was. And she had just the strongest representation of her culture there. And she had the women who worked there she had a native language, Spanish and English. And so the women that worked there were from her community. They were, the aunties in the kitchen, basically, she was running a center, essentially. She had cooks in the kitchen. She had baby teachers, she had toddler teachers, and they're speaking 3 languages, and their culture is just spread throughout. And it was just incredible. And the way she was able to build that was with her community. So how do we kind of build that more? And my job as a coach then is to come in and say, you've got this. Like, you obviously know, best practice education. First of all, it might not look like our curriculum, but you already have all the practices in place. How do we capture that to check our boxes and let you do your thing? Because you've got it going on, so how do we, that's another space where we're seeing what skills are already there instead of trying to shift it to that norm.
I might be able to add a little to Maria's question. I also have the privilege of working with Maria every day in our classroom together. So I can just, share with Maria, but if it's helpful for anyone else on this, I can. So I work at Hilltop. I live in Linwood, a few blocks from Edmonds College. Are we neighbors, Lisa?
Yep.
And I finished 2 degree programs at Edmonds College myself in the last couple of years. And in addition to my full-time position as an educator at Hilltop, I also was asked by the college about 6 months ago to if I could step in and do like a little side gig as an outreach specialist. So Edmonds College got a grant, and I'll have to look up the name of the grant, specifically to hire people to help identify the needs that are present, that are roadblocks to in-home providers that are offering like bringing that cultural experience to their clients, and what are the roadblocks for the providers to getting the education they need, one, just to meet the RCW requirements now for in-home providers, but 2, to also help them address some of the challenges that they're facing and find them more of those resources. A piece of that by providing access to education. And so through this grant, Edmonds College hired an outreach specialist, and I ended up filling in that role for the last 6 months, where I actually help the in-home providers that want to enroll in college. I help them through that enrollment process because it's incredibly confusing. It's so confusing as a white person who speaks English as my primary language. I get online and I'm like, what is this question even asking? Yeah. So I was helping those in-home providers enroll and then get their Canvas set up and get registered for classes. The director of the ECE program at the college was in helping them apply for early achievers so they could receive those resources. And then with the grant, they also hired tutors whose native language was the languages spoken by those in-home providers, so that they could help tutor them through their classes and like help them get their homework completed, help them understand the assignments, help them feel like they had someone that, that understood what that challenge is with the language barrier and why it's so hard to take classes at an American community college when that's not your primary language and that's not the culture that you grew up in. Even around the culture of education, we all have different cultures of education depending on where we grew up. And so that's just one example of where a community college applied for a grant that was available, I think, to all community colleges. And I think it was related to COVID, but anyway, just one example. And we ended up enrolling, just in the 6 months between spring quarter and now in summer quarter. And then I've already helped a couple of people enroll for fall quarter. I think it was 23 in-home care providers in the South Snohomish County region that are now enrolled in college to get at least their 12 credit ECE credential.
So Keely, I appreciate that you're sharing that story. And I also work in higher education, so I get that aspect of what you're talking about. And at the same time, as we're talking about those systemic systems that Lisa had brought up a second ago, there is there is something about the fact that we're even having to talk to these home providers about going to continue to get higher education in what we perceive as a need. And you talked about the RCWs, which is changing so that people who have been doing this work for a really long time are no longer qualified or are no longer meeting licensing requirement, because our systemic system says you have to have a higher ed degree in order to be good enough to do a job that you have done for years. So I'm not knocking it down because I also work in that system, but at the same time, it's so frustrating. And one of the things that I see happen often is I have met hundreds of students and educators who have formal education in their home countries, or and if they are immigrants or refugees that come to the United States, and they cannot receive a job, or they can't find a job, or they're asked to go back to school to get a higher ed degree that meets our standards, even though they have more experience and more education than many of us may have. And I see it often when I'm looking at international transcripts or seeing someone else's degree or diploma from another country, and it's just not accepted here. So it's a hard world to straddle, right? Supporting that need, and supporting folks to getting that higher education degree, and still fighting the fight to say that education, no matter what language it's in, no matter what country it comes from, education and experience matters, and it should be counted for. And all credits should be counted for, not just the ones that we as a country assume are the right credits.
I can't tell you how many, at my son's school, I work with the equity team, which is mostly women of color, but women not born in the US. And I can't tell you how many of them have like insane degrees and then they can't get a job here. Like one of them's a literal doctor. Like it's insane. When I was doing my coaching thing, I was working with one of the teacher's assistants, and I'm like talking to her and kind of like trying to gather what her experience is. She had the exact same degree as I did, and she knew the curriculum better than I did. I'm like, but she's from Mexico, and so it didn't transfer. I'm like, you should have my job. Do you want my job? How can I help you get my job? Like it's crazy how it's so easy to blow over that and assume something about someone just because of where they're working, how they're talking, all of those things. And back to building those relationships, but I mean, we just have to get to know the people we're working around, and know their story and know what's behind them, and get to know really where their strengths are, and what brings them joy and what brings them excitement, and where they're gonna flourish the most, so I can't believe how fast everything's going. So I'm going to kind of scoot to the next part, because I think we're kind of doing a lot of it already, but I want to share my story in hopes that it is, kind of a, not inspiring, but an invitation to be vulnerable is what it is. And around identity and how we hold privilege and that critical, we can skip this part, sorry. Can you go to 10, maybe? That one, yeah. Critical self-reflection, it's just like mandatory to, as part of your, anything really, but as being an intentional teacher, bringing equality and equity to your classroom, bringing that equity and equality to your relationships, and being able to have that practice of empowering others as a leader and as a coach or a mentor or director, or really whatever. That critical self-reflection has to come first, that unpacking the invisible knapsack, or whatever is, I think, a term. So my story of just kind of who I am and how I hold privilege has been a journey, and it's also, I think, a really good reminder that our power and how we hold it is really fluid, and it's contextual. So in some areas I hold a lot of power, in other areas I don't hold a lot of power. In some areas I have great privilege, in other ways I've been oppressed or discriminated against. So there's, we always have to kind of, it's not a straight linear thing. It's like, when and where am I holding power? I will try not to rant or try not to go on for too long, but still give you, a meaningful, sharing something meaningful. So at the beginning, I introduced myself as Chicane, and that has, it's an acknowledgement of my ancestry, basically, of my Mexican and Indigenous family from my dad's side. And being Mexican was a large part of how I grew up and how I identified myself for a really long time. And then really last fall in my grad program, one of our first assignments was to write basically this, write a paper about who we are and our identity, and kind of how the story and the history of social justice and injustice really kind of wrapped into that. So I really worked on my identity as a Mexican, as a person of color. Like, these are things that I held on. And obviously I'm very white presenting, and I don't speak Spanish well at all. And I have blue eyes. My mom's white. My dad is Mexican American. So anyway, as I was a kid, I noticed, I would say under 5, where we learn about our culture the most. I was surrounded by people who spoke different, smelled different, talked, lived differently, cooked different food. I didn't see my white grandparents a lot. I was mostly with my Mexican American grandparents in Eastern Washington. And so, that was a really magical thing for me, to have this little place that felt a little different. And then kind of getting into school and that socialization, I quickly, and as I reflected back, I realized it was really white people who put that label on me as Mexican. And it wasn't necessarily something my family was giving me, that language. And it wasn't, it didn't have any meaning until people started saying it to me. And I was like, oh, maybe that's why I'm so different. Like, I've always just felt so different. So it must be because I'm Mexican. And so that kind of went with me. But then I started getting other messages about how I'm, not good enough and smelly and chubby and ugly and not smart, and all these other messages I was getting from society and from my school, or from the people I went to school with. And I went to a very privileged school of mostly white affluent families whose parents worked in the classroom. It was a co-op, kindergarten through 8th grade. That right there is an immense privilege. And my family obviously had the resources so that I could attend, but you could still tell that we were kind of like on the lower end of that. I felt that so much. Like, I felt poor compared to these people, and I just laugh at that now. So it was kind of this contrast, and then these just constant messages of like, you're not good enough in all these ways. You feel different in here. I just inside feel different. And all of you are telling me I'm Mexican. These things must be the same. And so this idea of being Mexican actually became quite a negative thing. And as I reflect on it, it was really a lot of how I related to that term was really in this like internalized white supremacy way of I was attaching all of my downfalls to being Mexican. And I saw, there were downfalls in my family that I saw. And so I was like, of course it's true, because my family is also playing out these stereotypes, and Mexicans are this way and that way. And we talk shit about each other and make jokes about each other. And so I really grew with that term actually having quite a negative spin on it once I really started reflecting on it. And then I also started working with actual Mexican women from Mexico. And that was also part of my process of being like, I'm not Mexican, they're Mexican. I'm Mexican American. But even then I felt like that wasn't quite right for me. And through working with one of my mentors, who is a Chicano woman, she really helped me find some empowerment in the term Chicano or Chicana or Chicane, because there's so much fight in the Chicano movement, in the Chicano spirit, so much passion, so much resiliency, activism, all of that, that's who I am inside. And I am inside of that because of my experience around being Mexican, other, not white, not rich. And where was I going? So she really helped me find this term that empowered me in a way that I could leave the negative parts that I have attached to my Mexican or Chicano identity, and really find the empowerment. And then through that, writing that paper, I also learned about inherent qualities that Latino culture cultivates. And that was also very empowering to kind of pull all these things like relational skills, like being able to build relation and build community, is something that Latino cultures and communities are great at, right? Like for me anyway, I know who to call, and I know how to make friends, and I know the meaning of community. Resiliency is something that has come out of my family's history, and something that I carry that isn't necessarily always celebrated as a positive thing. I think more so now, but I didn't give it that credit. It also helped me, kind of going through this process, also helped me realize where the amount of privilege I hold, and being a white person, like for a long time, I had resentment and anger and like, don't ever call me white because you don't know what I've been through, kind of thing. And like, you don't know, like my, kind of really protective about that, and really making a stance in that. And I really, as I reflected, it really was coming from a resentment of kind of just all that negative language I heard, and the feeling of feeling less than all the time. I really held that against kind of white women in general. So I kind of had to work, I did have to work through that and realize, actually, I have a lot of privilege here, that I've even kind of been able to get to this spot and find something, and that I have a choice of how to identify myself and kind of where I sit. And then of course, all that knowledge and this insight and reflection is going to change how I'm interacting with the people that I'm working with. Because before, I might have used my identity as a person of color to maybe like relate to another person of color, but I'd actually don't really have, like, not to compare things at all, but I just don't have the same experience as someone maybe who is darker, or a Black person, or really any sort of difference. Like, we won't have the same story of what a person of color means. And I have to also acknowledge that I will never discredit the oppression or negative experience that I have had in my life, but I also have to acknowledge it, that it is much different than someone who might be more forward presenting. Yes, yeah. And so basically, to kind of share all this, is like, I've gone from being so sure of myself in one way and holding myself in one way and interacting in my relationships in one way, to really breaking that down and understanding a better sense of who I am and the privilege that I hold. And now it's like a different thing. And so just to show that it is an experience, it's a journey that we have to go on and really like break apart. And through that, just as the last part, through, kind of breaking down being Mexican, I always think of the meme, the Wayne's World meme. Do you guys know this? Wayne's World, where he's like, I thought I had mono for an entire year, and it turns out I was just bored. I'm always like, I thought I was Mexican my whole entire life, but it turns out I'm just gay and I have ADHD. It's actually the reason I felt so different were actually these other things that were hidden under this other blanket that white supremacy gave me, white dominant culture gave me that. Yeah, I could go on forever. Internalized white supremacy and that internalized racism, I see it in my own family so much, and it really surprised me of how much I had held on to that as well, because I felt like I was aware of it. And then just this deep, deep digging really kind of changed my perspective. So that is my story. What do I also want to say? Maybe going into kind of this next part, or I don't know, maybe we can pause and just kind of ask you all, like, do you participate in critical self-reflection? Have you, what has that experience been like? And where have some of your hangups been? Where have your enlightenments been? Just kind of opening it up a little bit.
And Lisa, do you want to do this as a large group, or do you want to do this in a breakout?
What do you all want to do? I'm okay keeping it open.
That's
since
fine.
we're rather small. People feel comfortable.
And I want to also just offer it up that we've heard from a lot of we've heard from voices, but there's a lot of people who we haven't heard from. So just inviting that to happen as well.
Yeah, please. Yeah, I hope that this feels like a safe place to be vulnerable and kind of, we all got it going on. Leanne?
Yes, and my name is Leanne, and I teach at Hilltop part-time, and I also work at a cooperative school. But I totally, as you were sharing your reflection, I see some parallels in that I was born and raised in Hawaii. And as a Japanese American Hawaiian fourth generation, that's kind of part of being in the dominant culture in Hawaii. So I lived in Hawaii for 35 years, and then I moved to Seattle. And when I moved to Seattle, there's several reasons why I moved, but I also was taking classes at Pacific Oaks College. And the week that I moved in, started these classes, and one of the first activities was there were these statements on the wall, and you had to put a little post-it of what you identified with. And one of them said Asian, one of them said Japanese American. I think the instructor did some homework and tried to figure out what the class was. And I didn't put anything on either of those. And I got questioned. Right away. Wait, Leanne, I wonder why you didn't, sign up for Asian. And I said, to me, I've never been to Asia. I'm fourth generation. I've never been to Japan. And in Hawaii, I didn't identify as a Japanese American. We didn't have to put the American part in there. I was Leanne, and everybody accepted whoever I was, because in Hawaii, there are so many ethnicities that the lists would go. I mean, you would be Japanese, American, Filipino, American, you would be like so many, right? So anyway, come moving to Seattle, and all of a sudden I didn't know what it was. I thought it was what people referred to as culture shock, that term. What was happening? Like all of a sudden I was getting treated differently. Slowly by slowly, I would notice these little things that would be bigger and bigger. And again, it's the idea of white supremacy or the systems putting on me and telling me who to identify as, when that's not what I felt like. 35 years of my life, I thought I knew who I was. And all of a sudden I'm being judged and, put into places, and, access was different and that kind of thing. And I was so confused. I was like, what is going on here? And the more I live in it, of course, now I've been in Seattle for almost 20 years, but I understand it, and I see, I can figure out that it really isn't me. It's not me that's changing, or it's not me that's needing to change in certain ways, but how do we deal with these systems? How do we then, so having that reflection, understanding that there are many families and kids in my care who might have that same experience where, as Lisa said, she grew up in a community where she knew who she was. She had the smells and the sounds and all of that, and you get rooted somewhere else. So how do we make that reflection in our schools where kids can at least feel like they can be themselves without having somebody else tell them, oh, you're this, or you need to do this, or a teacher who is trying to incorporate culture into the classroom that's reflective of the families, but not doing it in the right way by saying, oh, we're going to eat rice today because, thinking that families eat rice. If you're Asian, not all Asian families eat rice, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
How do we make that happen? It's so tricky, but I carry that with me in every instance or every workplace that I am, or just in general, for that feeling of, thinking that, and I didn't realize, of course, when you're in the dominant culture, you don't realize all the privileges you have, right? You don't realize you're in the dominant culture. And so now even looking back at, when my parents say certain things, I'm like, that's really racist what you just said, but I said the same things, not knowing it, right? So it's kind of that flip of it. But because of the way of my appearance, the way that I look, I get put into these categories when really I probably feel more like the people who are the dominant culture, because I grew up mostly feeling that way. So anyway, that's kind of my reflection. That's taking off of yours, which is similar but different. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. It's so valuable and powerful for us to go through that process of reflecting. And I think, this is kind of on my next slide, but one of the biggest hangups I think that can get in the way of doing this work is shame, and like feeling like we're not good enough because maybe we didn't realize that we were very privileged or very powerful. Like, I feel embarrassed as hell most of the time. I'm like, I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I thought I had the authority to say that. Like, there are many moments that I've gone back and been like, oh my gosh. But reflecting and sharing, I think, is just like, for me anyway, the most powerful way to kind of process all of this, and to share. And like, one thing in one story kind of sparks this other thing in another person, just like you were saying, and how we can use that as a safety, as reassurance that we're all going through this, we're all processing this, and that we've all made mistakes, and it's not bad, but we also have a responsibility to go through it. Jen, you just came on screen. Do you want to share?
Yes, but I noticed that Daniel had his hand up. So
No, go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay, sorry, and I
Yeah,
just assumed.
Go ahead, Jen.
I
We haven't heard
apologize.
from you yet.
My name is Jen Ocampo, and I work for United Indian Small Tribes Foundation at the Daybreak Preschool. And I identify as female, pronouns she, her. I am of Mexican descent. My parents immigrated back in the 80s. So I really connected with what you said, Lisa, and Leanne, because I've always identified as Mexican. I've never lived in Mexico. I have visited multiple times, but yeah, I speak Spanish pretty fluently, and I have a child also. My 8-year-old son. He is mixed. His dad is Italian and Irish, I believe, but identifies as a white male. But him and I separated many years ago, and now it's just my son and I and my current partner. And I am really struggling with, how do I keep my Mexican culture, right? And what parts I identify that with, but also show that to my son, while also being accepting of his other side. And so trying to find that balance and trying to find the language where, one, I'm not shaming him for anything, yet being accepting, and also not shaming myself for this journey that I'm currently in, right? I'm currently learning, currently trying to accept myself still, because it was very much that struggle. I didn't like speaking Spanish. I was ashamed of what I looked like. I was ashamed of what my family looked like, and it was due to all these labels. But yet here I am, right, many years later, having a kiddo who is he's very, very light complected, as opposed to myself. I'm very dark skinned. So I'm just like, okay, like where how could I help him find this balance if I haven't really found it for myself? So yeah. And also we both have ADHD, so I connected with that very much so also, and his identification is much more recent than mine, although I did have a very hard time, a very big struggle with accepting that for myself. And just trying to trying to understand how my brain works, not compare myself to others, but it's something that has happened for so long that it's so hard to realize that I'm already doing it, right? It's kind of like that reaction. It's already happening, and you don't even realize that you're doing it because it's been such an instilled thing on us. So yeah, that's my spiel. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jen. And I want, and I hope that everyone hears through all three of the past stories, and hopefully more, that it is so important that we get a different message of acceptance outside of white supremacy culture and or dominant culture, and to make it more broad. Because all, our internal struggles with identity, especially, if you're trying to use this oppressed identity as an empowering identity, it's so hard in yourself. And then, like you said, when you're trying to pass it on to your kid or to any of your kids in your school, if you don't have that inside work, it's going to be, it will be part of your journey. And it will also be, it'll be even harder if you're not doing it, the inside work as well. And just hearing you say, like, the fact that you're not sure how to share that culture, I hear that so much. And like, even the term Mexican sometimes sounds like raunchy or sounds degrading, and so how do I tell my child is blonde hair, blue-eyed, even though both his parents are mixed? I don't know what happened. Anyway, how do I give him that language when I don't, like you said, it took me so long to find positive language for myself. So but I think we all can learn from that, as that perspective taking of, when we're building those relationships and our working relationships and our relationships with our families, is you have a duty to empower who they are as they are, so that we don't keep repeating this, essentially. Daniel.
Thank you, Jen, for your remarks. Just in response to that last question you posed, how can I convey this to my child if I haven't achieved it myself? I think that's that goes beyond language and culture and many things. Just the sense that we're in this together. We're going to find these things out about ourselves together. I think it's very humbling to accept that you are on the same orbit as your child. Then that's okay. And so we're on this journey. And speaking of a journey, mine is probably pretty unique in that I've worked with toddlers for 50 years now. And after the pandemic, when I went back into the classroom, I told my administration, I think I've reached my quota on diapers. and all kind of the activities of care, the feeding and toileting and diapering. I want to be your school-wide, center-wide court jester. I want to bring the music. I play guitar. I want to bring the drums, the books, and the nonsense. But this took a kind of a departure for me to reflect on myself as a teacher, and realize that I was really moving towards something different. Prior to the pandemic, I would go to various schools. I would take my guitar, take my books, and go out into the community. And I was like a rock star, a total rock star. Those children were getting live music, and whatever school I went into, there was a red carpet there for me. And they sat down quietly, waiting for my word. So I had a whole host of outside hustles. They kind of vanished with the pandemic. So I went back to my administrator and said, I want to be, because we have 9 classrooms in our school, from toddler to preschool. And so I am now the court musician. I'm now the Uncle Drosselmeyer, if you know that term. I bring things that are totally unique, that children haven't seen or experienced. I've really had to devise innovative games with materials. So I am constantly bringing stuff. I'm bringing a jump rope that we play with, gyroscopes that we play with. We go out and do bubbles, dig in the sand, all the different activities that are not activities of care, all the different things that one does with children in a unique and playful way. So I am all of that acclaim that I got when I went to other schools is now happening in my own school. There I am. Wow, I'm like revered. I never thought I would use that word, but that's kind of the position that I have assumed. Looking at where I was over the past several decades and realizing that it wasn't a custom fit. It wasn't truly me. I could achieve things as a teacher, but I needed to change up my thinking and change up my identity and open up a new chapter. And so that's been the case for me over the past 6 months or so, to finally say, you know what, I see myself slightly differently than the predominant culture. So I went in to do a presentation of a group time in a classroom. I brought books, I brought my instruments and a few other accessories. And one substitute, she came up to me and said, "Are you a teacher?" as I was setting things up to present a class. And I said, no, I'm not really. I'm your court jester. I'm your joker. So for me, that's been a late game transition. And I realized that, in fact, this is who I truly am. And even though I have pursued this other career and this other identity, it wasn't sufficient. It wasn't complete. It was, as you have said, and as others have said, a culturally imposed identity. And I went along with it for a while, a long time. But I realized that, in fact, I have more to give. I have a different identity, and I bring something that enriches the program. That's it.
That's amazing, Daniel. I appreciate that we've been talking a lot about race and gender and other identities, but even thinking about who we are professionally, and that's an identity that we hold. So I think we all appreciate that perspective. I want to keep us moving along. We have about 15 more minutes with Lisa, and I want to make sure that we get to have more of your knowledge shared with us. And I think I also am sad because there's so many of us on this call that I would love to hear your stories. So let me just put up the next slide. And if we do have time and space, maybe we could break out into smaller groups in a little bit to also allow for others to share their story. But let's get through the content that you have and see how much time we have at the end. Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, and I think these slides we can go through quickly, but I feel like if I don't show you them, then I'm not really like, well, hopefully I have already left you with things, but here are some concrete things to think about. I love Brene Brown because she's really great. So this is some Brene Brown resources. Anyway, so what I wanted to share is just kind of as thinking about how do we actually put this into action and make spaces where we feel free to change our identity, and we feel free and safe to express ourselves and be who we are, and stay in our culture, and not feel like we have to conform one way or another. Like, this is information to take in as our position of leadership or, mentorship or whatever. Anyway, what makes power dangerous is how it's used. Power over, so like powering over someone, is driven by fear. Daring and transformative leaders, which we all are, share power with empower people too, and inspire people to develop power within. So I think that sums up kind of everything really well about, you know, we can hold power, we can hold privilege, and then it's how we use it. It's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but then how are we using that gatekeeping role? How are we using that point of privilege or experience or education or whatever? How are we using those skills to power with, empower people, and inspire people to power within, which I think is like, we all need that, right? We all need to know how to do that, feel like it's safe enough to do that, and build ourselves up. Give it to the man. So just a couple other things, just reading this really quick, or you all can read it, but the one that she kind of highlights is offer people experiencing fear and uncertainty, transparency, and create learning cultures based on critical thinking and evidence-based data from multiple perspectives. Getting it right is more than being right. And I think that's something, just a great mindset to take into building relationships is we're not going to know the other person. We're not going to know what's behind them. We're not going to know, you know, we probably won't be an expert in their culture, even if we do research. And we're not there to get that right. We're there to build that relationship so that we collectively can get it right. And it's not just about me being correct. Normalize discomfort, move away from shame and blame, frame leadership as a responsibility to be in service of others. That one is like, that like is my heart and my philosophy. I want to be in service of others. I want to be served by others as well, but I will like pay them or whatever. Yeah, center connection and humanity with empathy-driven agendas, policies, and values. And as I really read this through and I think about the next slide, which is Lisa's hot tips for opening up and extending power, basically the same thing Brene Brown said, recognizing where you stand, which is kind of all that critical thinking, all that internal work, and recognizing where you hold privilege and where you might not hold privilege and where you can work to empower yourself. Remember that at the end of the day, we're connecting as humans. And this is something that in a way made my job a lot more stressful, but brought me some peace, is at the end of the day, even when I was hitting deliverables, I was building really beautiful connections with other humans that I wouldn't even have access to in any other way. So that was the value for me, is what I would gain out of that actual relationship, because jobs are important. Jobs are necessary, unfortunately. However, when we all die, I want to know that I was kind and loving and made a true human connection with someone else. Stay curious and ask questions. So that's my another hot tip from Lisa. Just, you know, we don't know the answers, and we don't know, we shouldn't pretend that we do, because that just puts us in an awful position. And asking questions is a lifesaver for me. I have no fear in asking questions, and I'll probably ask you the same questions like 3 times because I'll forget, and that's kind of rude, but I'm working on it. Normalize mistakes. I think that kind of goes back to humility, and just, you know, it is what it is. What it isn't, it ain't, is my thing. And we all need that grace and that flexibility with each other, that it's not going to be perfect. Food is a great equalizer. I realize there's some, we could probably dig into that about food being an equalizer, but I think that there's nothing more beautiful than coming around a meal and sharing food with other people, and especially when you have to do something hard. It's nice to have food there, and it's a great way to know people, to learn culture, to learn stories, to learn about, you know, stories from your home and your past and all that. So and humor is also a great tool to use, sometimes a crutch, sometimes a tool. I think that we can all use more smiles and playfulness in our life. And so those are my hot tips for opening up and extending power. And that is my presentation.
I think it's so great, and I appreciate everything that you um, have shared with us today, Lisa. We have some time, and I wonder if people are willing. We've shared a lot of content about this. Breaking down the barriers of power and privilege, and all of you sit in different roles in your positions, and so um, uh, if you don't mind, maybe if we could spend like 7 minutes in smaller groups, and it's just a chance for you to connect in smaller communities, to share a little bit about the work that you're doing and how what we've been talking about today is coming to play in your everyday world. Does that sound okay? All right.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we're giving opportunity to those who haven't been able to talk, to have a smaller space to do that. So
Yeah.
give me a second. And we're gonna do um you're gonna have two other people in the room with you. Actually, I'm gonna do, yeah, you'll have 2 to 3 other people in the room with you, to just get a chance to share your stories with others, and talk about what we've been discussing in the last hour and a half that we've been together. So off you go. And I think that Tess was going to log off soon to head to something else, so she might be just not. Yeah, it looks like she got
Yeah.
jumped. She jumped off, and then I'm sure that Johnny will switch over when she gets to wherever she needs to be. I just want to say, awesome job! You're killing it. I know
Oh
that
my
you were
God.
worried.
Oh, Darlene, thank you. I think that's the hardest part about it, is like not knowing. Like, I'm so glad you're here, basically. I'm so glad you're here, just to, help me stay focused, and also for a little bit of feedback too, because I'm like, people are engaged, which is really what the biggest thing I wanted. So
Yeah. I think that I love the information that you're sharing and the content. I wonder if when we do this again, because we'll do it again, if maybe the topic of discussion is more around relationships and power and privilege in the ECE community,
yeah,
more
like a
than
little broader.
Yeah, because I think that, like, I think you try to bring it back to coaching, and I try to help bring it back to coaching, but a lot of the conversations were not necessarily about coaching and supporting directly.
Right.
So, like, I think maybe just a broader
Yeah.
Topic name would help drive that conversation.
Totally.
And then also, like, there were such great conversations, but I wonder, how do we sort of rein in the dominant voices in the group,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's always a hard struggle, because you do want to hear everyone, and it's great when people are eager to share, but then, yeah, you want to make sure that there's space for everyone without calling anyone out. So it's like, it was a little tricky, but
but I loved where the conversations went, and the fact that, like, topics that I don't even think you or I thought were going to come up, like ability, was amazing. And higher education, I don't think was something that was necessarily planned, but was in
Right.
there. Just makes you think that people are thinking about these things.
Yeah.
So when did you go back into the classroom? Just this year?
Yeah, like just in June.
What made you decide to switch?
I got fired. It was like they're like, you can't have this role anymore, but you can be a coach if you want, but just not in this early head start. It was way too much for me. And so it's like, I think I was trying so hard to hold on to it when clearly it wasn't working. then so I just took work off, and I was going to try to get a job at the city of Seattle and do a coaching job for them because my friend works there and I think she could have helped me get in. But then I did not want to go back to the classroom, but it's at Nurturing Knowledge is where I am. And it was just like, I love Reggio. It just seems so low stress, to be quite honest. And that's what I really needed. I like single parent, have kids, like I'm always on like the backup duty, childcare stuff. Like I needed to breathe. I needed room to breathe is what I needed. So it's just been a dream, and it feels like a teacher playground because there's just, the kids are only there for 4 hours.
Oh,
So,
that's it?
yeah, it's just preschool, and they don't have licensing. They're not
Oh,
licensed.
wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I'm like, there is no stress. Like it's amazing.
And which Nurturing Knowledge are you at?
I'm on the Maple Leaf campus.
Maple Leaf. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Does Maggie still work there? I think she was the director at the one that's in the school, the Nurturing Knowledge that's in
Greenwood, I think.
She's someone who I used to have in one of a focus group I was working on, and I've been trying to get a hold of her for a while because Nurturing Knowledge is a Reggio inspired program, and we get a lot of visitors that come to Hilltop to see our work, and we have a study tour coming up where folks from a university in California are coming to visit, and I always feel like I hate when we're like, come learn from us, we're so cool, we're the best, and I was trying to invite other schools to be a part of this tour where we would go, like they would come to Hilltop and we would do our thing, but then like we would spend a day or half a day at other programs to show them that come visit Seattle. Seattle has some awesome schools around here, and we're not the only, we're not the greatest. We are great, but we're not like the premier school. There's others out there. And so I tried to reach out because she was the only person I knew at Nurturing Knowledge. And so I tried to reach out, but never heard back. So,
I can definitely make that connection. I want to go on that tour. I was just telling my co-teacher that since Reggio inspired can come out in so many different ways, like their Reggio is much different than the Reggio that I was kind of like the style that I was taught in, basically.
Got it.
When I was at University UDCC, University District Children's Center.
Yeah.
Sandra is the director there. And we worked with you guys there at Hilltop, or worked with Hilltop there. Let
me welcome everybody back, and then when they're done, then I want to talk to you some more, but let me get these.
Thank you.
So they're going to be coming back in 60 seconds.
Great.
Just so that we're prepared. We're actually going away from saying that we're a Reggio inspired school as an organization. Right. I've been with Hilltop I'm going on my 3rd year, or 4th year, I don't know. But like there's a lot of privilege that comes with Reggio inspired schools. And so we're our business name is Seattle Institute for Early Child Development. And so like I've been trying to, even the name Hilltop is associated with privilege. And so like we're breaking down some serious barriers to say like we're a child development center, and you're going to come learn about different theories and philosophies. And we're not going to prescribe to one.
Cool.
And it's been really hard, but we're getting there.
Oh, I'd love to hear more about that. So interesting.
All right, let's see. How'd that go, Cindy?
It was cool.
You had a chance to connect on a smaller scale, I hope.
A little bit.
Okay, it's never enough time. We never have enough time. Okay, well, I think everyone is coming back or should be back soon. So this is the time of the day where we get to reflect on our time together. And I think you all had a chance to spend a few minutes getting to know each other on a more personal level. And I want to open up to everybody here. If anybody has any words of affirmation or connections that they want to share with either Lisa or other members that were in this group today. So I'll open that up for you all.
I would like to thank Lisa for bringing your warm and charming energy to this place and making it a place where we can have conversations and smile and be together. And Darlene as well for keeping the conversation moving and asking great questions. So thanks for building this space.
Thank you. That was my goal. So I'm so glad you felt that. And yes, thank you so much, Darlene. Thank you so much. And I will also say back to you, Pam, thank you for bringing up the kind of the conversation around ability and disability and kind of checking us into that conversation, because it's definitely one I think we could all have so much more.
Well, I can tell that it's 12:32 and that everyone is at the end of their like mental capabilities of holding information in their heads. Again, I got the chance to talk to Lisa a little bit while you were in your breakout rooms, but to publicly acknowledge that I appreciate that you drew us into some deep conversations today. And whether or not it connected directly to coaching or not, I think it's about relationships, and relationships are something that is embedded in all the work that we do with children, with families, and within our community. So thank you for sharing your knowledge, your experience, and being a little bit vulnerable. I know how hard that is. And to all of you who shared your story, I appreciate that you also leaned into that discomfort that sometimes comes with that. And I appreciate that we're starting to learn as a society that it's okay to share your story, and that your story is special, and it doesn't define you one way or another as being good as or better than somebody else. Your story is your story, and it's who you are. So thank you all for doing that. And as we close out, just a reminder that we have more educator discussion series available. I know that summer was hard for us. And so at Hilltop, we are trying to look into having more in-person trainings come back into our world as people are comfortable. So we will be switching some of our trainings to be in person, with the option of hybrid coming into it virtually as needed, for those of us who learn in community more freely in being in the same space together. And then for those of us who are just not quite ready to jump into big group settings. So look forward to that, and stay hydrated and healthy, and wash your hands, and go enjoy the rest of your Saturday. We'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
He was so cute. I just wanted to put him in my pocket.
Yeah.
So is there anything that you want to send out to the participants after the fact? Any resources or anything like that?
Yeah, shoot, I don't have anything together, but I guess it would be nice to be able to send that Brene Brown, the full thing. It's just a little PDF, and then I could send the artist Andrew Morrison's information in there. But my kids just walked in the door, so it might be a minute till I could.
I'm not going to do any more work today, so take your time.
Beautiful.
On Monday, I'll send a follow-up email just thanking people for participating. So
awesome.
And it won't even be Monday early. So take your time.
Cool.
If you just want to send something over, I could add it in that sort of thank you for joining us.
Perfect.
Communication, and then go enjoy your kids. But let's connect again. So I would love to know more about lots of other things that you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would absolutely love to stay connected, and yeah, I thank you again for being here and being my little support buddy.
Of course, of course. All right. Have a good weekend.
You too. See
All
ya.
right, bye.